Hi everyone, I'm Jo. Today I'm going to show you one of my favourite makes, especially at this time of the year when the weather's a bit gloomy and I'm longing for the warmer, sunnier days. I'm going to show you how to make leather wrap bracelets, okay? So on this one I've made it a double wrap and I have used 4mm gemstones called apatite, and this is another one I've just made this week. It's a quadruple wrap, so 4 times round my wrist, using seed pearls with a bit of a blingy button there as the clasp. So I'm going to show you how to make those. They're great to layer up in the springtime or the summer. You're going to need a macrame board. If you don't have a macrame board, a clipboard will do, but you'll need some extra clips to hold your leather in place. On the macrame board we have these notches which are perfect for holding threads and leather in place. So that's today's little lesson, is on the leather wrap bracelets. Hope you enjoy it. To make the wrap bracelets, you're going to need a macrame board, and I am using a mini macrame board. It's just easier to use, and particularly when you're using bracelets. If you've only got one of the big ones, if you turn it on its side and bead down the width, that's more suitable for your bracelet. The macrame board has got all the markings for your measurements down the side, so you can see exactly where 1 inch is, 3 inches, 6 inches, so you know how far to bead for your bracelet. So we've got the macrame board. You need a T-pin or a macrame pin that's going to hold your work in place. You're going to need some scissors, some sort of glue. I'm using GS Hypo cement because it's got this precision needle tip on the end, which means I can get the glue exactly where I want it on the leather or on the thread. We're going to be using leather, and I'm using a 1mm leather here. Need a thread. This is an S-lon thread, so you get the S-lon thread and the S-lon cord. The thread is the smaller bobbin and a much thinner thread. I think it's about 0.4mm in width. Beading needles. I'm going to use 2 needles, size 10. Pop those there as well. A button. The button is going to be my clasp. So you can have it a fabric covered button, any kind of button to go with your design. And the beads that I'm using today are these 4mm apatite beads, apatite gemstone. I am a blue girl at heart, and I just love the variation in the tones of the blues in these apatites. The very first thing you need to do is measure the length of leather that you're going to need. And the easiest way to do this is, well, first of all, you've got to decide how many wraps you're going to do. If you're going to do a single wrap or a double wrap around your wrist, or a triple, quadruple, or you could even go 5 times around your wrist, but you measure it the same way. So I'm holding the very end in my hand, and I'm then going to take the leather around my wrist. That's once, that's twice for a double wrap. Then you're going to keep your finger where you measured the twice and double it, because you've got leather going down both sides. And then you're going to add a few inches at the bottom to allow for your clasp. Once you've cut your leather, the next thing we need to do is to attach it to the button, which is our clasp. So I'm just going to pass one end through the shank of the button there. If your leather is a bit thicker, or the hole in the shank is a little small, you could always cut your leather on the slant into more of a needle, and that will help get it through. So you want your button to be right in the middle of your leather. So I'm just moving the leather down, I'm holding the button halfway and I'm going to make sure that these two ends are equal. They don't have one end longer than the other. Then what you're ready to do is to tie a normal overhand knot as close to this shank as possible. So I'm just going to wrap the leather round my finger and then I'm going to pop the two ends through. Just pull them through. And before I pull too tight, I want that knot as close to the top of my button as possible. So I'm just going to slide it up with my fingers till it's right near that shank there. Before you make your knot too tight, you're going to thread about 2 meters of your S-lon thread. Hope you can see it there. I've used a contrasting colour to the leather so that it's easier to see. You're going to thread 2 meters onto 2 needles, so a needle either side. I'm using the needles because that makes it a lot easier to pass through the bead when you need to. And if the hole size in your beads is large enough to accommodate a needle, that's the way to do it. If the hole size in your beads is teeny tiny, then you might want to add a bit of glue onto the end of your thread to stiffen it up and make it into a needle itself. So we tied our knot, and before we make it too tight, I'm going to pass the needle through part of that knot just to attach the thread on. And again, you want your thread to be in the middle. You don't want a long thread on the left hand side and a short thread on the right hand side. You want them to be even. So this is going to go out of shot just as I get them even for you. Right. And I'm just going to now pull my leather threads really tight on that knot. Later when we're finished, we're going to add glue onto the knots and onto the thread where you see it passing through the leather, just to secure it. So I'm using my thumbnail and my forefinger and I'm just really tightening up that knot close to the ring shank. So if I get one of these threads out the way, they've crossed over on each other. It is fiddly in the beginning because you've got such a long length of thread, but it's easier that way than having to add thread halfway through, which you can do, of course. So now I'm going to make this or attach this to my macrame board, and I'm going to take my T-pin right up to the top, and I am going to, you can either go through the knot or through the ring shank and just pin it in place so that it's secure at the top of your board. And then your 2 leather threads, you're going to use the notches down at the bottom of the board. Just slide them into the notches because this will keep your leather threads taut while you add beads in between. It's like a leather runway and you're adding beads in between. I need to fiddle with this because that's not going to stay where I want it to, so I'm actually bringing the pin just in front of the knot. Oh, you can't see that there. There we go. I've brought the pin just in front of the knot and I've got S-lon thread on a needle to the right and S-lon thread on a needle to the left. I've got just a normal felt bead mat underneath, and it means that I can just pop the needles in so that I don't lose them. I'm just jabbing into the felt. The whole way while we do this wrap, the thread, the S-lon thread, is going to come round the outside of the leather and into the middle to pass through a bead. So you will get this ladder type formation down the edge of the leather, with the thread. Put your teeth in, Joe, and speak properly. So you can see I've got my threads going towards the outside, what I'm going to do is I'm bringing the right needle under the leather on the right into the middle. I'm going to pop a couple of beads here. And I'm going to pass the needle, or I'm going to pick up one bead. So this is my needle from the right hand side. I've come under the leather into the middle. And I'm just going to pop it at the top on the left hand side, and I'm going to pick up my needle on the left, and I'm going to come under the leather on the left and pass through the bead. So I've gone under the leather into the middle and through the bead, and I'm going to be coming out the other side. Now, when you have super long thread, you can get tangled very easily. So my advice to you is to go slowly in the beginning. There's no race, but if you are slow and careful, you're not going to get in a tangle, and you're going to save time in the end because you won't be having to stop and undo and pull your threads, take the needles off, pull the threads apart. And I'm going to just pull that right up to the top. So the more pressure I put pulling these threads to the side, you can even slide them into the notches if you want to, but I don't do that with this particular wrap because I'm soon enough going to be taking them under the leather into the middle again to add another bead. So you can see how these first threads are now going to sit on top of the leather. So again, I'm picking up my needle that's on the right, I'm coming under the leather into the middle, and I'm going to pass it through a bead when I see the hole. And I'm going to put that needle onto the left hand side above the needle that I had on the left, pick up my needle on the left, pass it under the leather into the middle. I'm just going to pull this thread through a bit because I can see it's going to get in a tangle as soon as I add in more thread. So I've come under the leather on the left into the middle, and I'm going to pass through the center of the bead and pull my needle through to the other side. You'll notice I'm just keeping my finger there, I'm holding the bead in place. It's just so that it doesn't go all over the show. And I'm going to pull through. And there's my second bead in place. And you can just manipulate them up a little so that they're sitting right in the apex of that leather at the top there. And I'm hoping you can see the first little ladder that comes around that top bead before we start on this one. So I'm ready to do the third bead now. Picked up the right hand needle under the leather on the right and into the center. Pick up a bead, find the hole. Sometimes I feel like my fingers are way too stodgy to do this. So through the bead, pull your thread through and leave that needle on the left hand side. Pick up the needle on the left, come under the leather on the left and pass through the bead. Pull your thread all the way through. I'm going to just stab my mat on the right, and when I pull those two through, I've now got 3 beads in place, and you can start to see the little ladder of S-lon thread that builds up down the sides of the leather. And it's really neat, and it's not anything that I'm doing to make it neat, it's just the size of the beads will show you the width between your ladder rungs. So I'm picking up my needle on the right, I'm passing under the leather on the right and into the middle. I'm picking up another bead and I'm going to pass through that bead and pull my thread through before stabbing my bead mat on the left hand side. Pick up the left hand needle, pass under the leather on the left and into the center, and then through that bead from the left to the right, and I'm going to hold it in place while I pull my thread through, stabbing my mat on the right, and when I pull my threads securely through, I've now got 4 in place. So I'm going to do a few more of those, and then I'm going to come back to you and show you a little tip that I do sort of when I've beaded about 4 inches along my bead board. I haven't quite beaded 4 inches yet, but I wanted to show you something. The further down you bead, the wider this leather runway becomes. So when you're adding your beads, the further down you go, you want to be pulling that tension a bit tighter so that you don't have any gapping on the right or the left hand side with your S-lon thread. So I'm adding a bead. I'm going to pass through from the left and through the bead and over the other side, and just pull it tight because you're pulling in the leather to hug the beads either side. Right, I'll be back about there now. So I'm coming under the leather on the right, pick up a bead, pass through a bead, put my right hand needle into the left hand side of my mat, pick up my left hand needle, come under the leather on the left, into the center, pass through the bead and over the leather on the right before popping my needle down into my bead mat on the right and just pulling those 2 bits of leather in. Now, depending on your tension, especially if you've never done these before, if you're pulling too tight, you will find that these beads will start popping up one on top of each other. And if you just run your finger down your row of beads slightly, it will just even it out and flatten it out, and you'll get rid of any of the lumps and bumps. So I'm going to continue now all the way. I've only done 4.5 inches. So I know that 1 wrap round my wrist is about 6 inches. The further down I go, what you can do is you take your pin out and you just slide the work up your board and pop your pin back in again. Make sure that the other end, your leather, is taut so that it's ready to continue beading, but you will need to keep measuring. So if you know that you're going to measure or you're going to bead once around your wrist for 6 inches, I would try and bead the 6 inches before moving your work up. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to move my work back down and I will bead the 6 inches before I actually move it, but I just wanted to show you how easy it was to move your work up. And I will come back to you to show you how to finish off. If I need to add in thread, I will certainly come back on to the video to show you how I'm doing that. But as I said in the beginning, using such a long piece of thread, I'm hoping that we don't need to. So I'm at 4 inches, just over 4 inches, make sure it's flat. I will continue beading till I get to about 6. With these wrap bracelets, you don't want them to be too loose and floppy around your wrist. You want them to be quite a snug fit. So, you know, if you normally do a beaded bracelet to 7 inches and it's got a bit of give in it, maybe bead to 6.5 inches on these. So I'm going to continue to 6 and then I will move my work up and I'm going to do another 6 inches because I'm doing a double wrap. And I'll come back to you to show you how to end it off. So I've now beaded my second length of 6 inches and I've just added my last bead there and I've got my thread coming over the top on either side of my leather. But I need to secure that one still, so I'm going to pick up the right needle, come under the leather into the middle and back through the bead and over the leather on the left. And then I'm going to pick up my left hand needle and I'm going to come under the leather on the left into the middle and through the bead and over the leather on the right. And that's just formed that last little ladder there on the edge of my leather. I have been running my finger down through the spine of my beads just to keep them flat so that they're not bunching up at all. And the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is how we're going to finish off. So as long as you've beaded your full length, I actually have loads of thread left over. I didn't need to add any in. If you did need to add in, you would go through your last bead like we just have now and knot the ends, and you'd then have to put a drop of glue on the knots either side, and then you could start again. The best thing to do would be to thread through a few of the beads. But if you can work with one length of thread, it just makes these edges so much neater. So to remind you, that was 2 meters of thread and I've got loads left over. So I'm now going to just slide the needles off the ends, off both my ends. And then I'm going to take my T-pin out, which was right at the top. And I'm going to now take this off my macrame board, so I'm just going to remove that there. The first knot I'm going to tie, just make sure those are tight there, is going to be an overhand knot, just as we did up at the top when we added our button. I'm going to tie a knot in the end here, and I'm going to use both the threads and the leather, so I'm holding them all together, leather and thread, around my finger, and then I want all 4 threads, so the 2 ends of the leather and the 2 S-lon threads to come through the center. Just make sure I've got them both, the S-lon threads there. I think I've only got one at the moment. There we go. And I want that knot to be as close to my last bead as possible. So just as in the beginning, I slide that knot up with my thumb and my forefinger. I slide it up towards that last bead there. Okay, I will be popping glue where all the leather crosses and where the threads, I can see them peeking out of the leather. Right, so a little tip. If you're worried that you haven't made your wrap long enough, instead of just doing one section for the clasp, I'm going to show you how we're going to do 2 sections for the clasp. So it gives you a bit of leeway, especially if you're making for someone else. But when you tie your next knot, you've got to have a space that's wide enough to allow your button to pass through. So I always bring the beginning of my work towards the end so I can just measure the width of that button, and I'm going to put my thumb there and get ready to tie my next knot. You don't want to make it too big because you don't want the button to just slide in and out. So I'm keeping my thumb where I wanted it. I've left the S-lon threads out now. I'm just tying with the leather. So there's a knot. You can see my threads are here. And I'm going to tie another one the same sort of distance, so you can measure again just to be sure. Overhand knot and pass the leather through. You can see I'm keeping my thumb on my left hand there. I'm not moving it, so I know exactly where I want that knot to be, and pull it tight. So I've got 2 options for popping my button through the clasp, and that gives me leeway, as I said earlier, if I have made it a little small. I'm going to now cut the ends of my leather off. I'm going to leave about 0.5 centimeter beyond this bottom knot here, just so that I've always got something that I can pull tight just to make sure it's not coming undone. Next stage is gluing, so I'm going to take my Hypo cement. I've always got a bit of paper towel nearby because it does come out. Don't squeeze too hard, it will come out. And you're just going to, with that needle, you're going to pop the glue, as I said, where I see the S-lon threads exiting through the leather. Just make sure that you're getting a good dollop of glue there. And then I'm going to put some here where the leathers cross over. Just going to work my way around that knot, dabbing a bit of glue where the various threads cross over, and this will just help secure them a bit. I'm going to do the same on the next knot, although there's no thread involved here, this is just leather. So I'm just doing a little bit of glue, and the same on the end. And you'll do the same on the top near your button where we tied the very first knot. You're going to do exactly the same there. So I'll come back to you when I've done all the gluing. Once your glue has dried, you can take your scissors and just snip off those S-lon threads close to the leather knot that you've tied. And your wrap bracelet is complete, where your button is just going to slide through one of your clasp areas that you've made, and you have a beautiful wrap bracelet for the spring. Now I make these a lot for the spring and summer because they're just fun to wear. So here's another one that I've recently made with seed pearls, and again you can see I used a contrasting thread to the leather because I quite like that ladder pattern down the side of the leather, and I've used a bit of a blingy button there. So this one's a little more understated. They're quite great, quite nice for gents jewelry too. So if you have any questions, pop them in the links below, in the comments below, and I'll answer them as quickly as possible. I will come back to do more wrap bracelets using different shaped seed beads and ordinary seed beads. It's endless what you can do with your leather wraps. Your imagination can take you down many a path with these, and you'll be amazed at the creations you can come up with. Thanks for watching. Bye.